Morning. Good morning, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on when you are. I'm Jackie Zahner. We'll just give everyone a few seconds to join us. If you're watching this on a recording, welcome. Is it February 21st? 20th. How can it be February 20th? It's our first LinkedIn Live of the year. I'm so excited to be introducing our special guest in just a second. We used to be able to play walk-on music, but now it's flagged for licensing and you don't want to hear me sing, so I'll have to just vibe away with you for a minute. Again, I'm Jackie Zahner. Welcome to our first LinkedIn Live of the year. Excited that you're here. Well, I think I should just get started and tell you about the very special guests that will be joining me for the LinkedIn Live discussion today. And I already hope that you read all about Barbara and her incredible work on our most recent She Money newsletter. So Barbara Annis is truly a world-renowned expert on leadership. Her insights and achievements have pioneered a transformational shift in mindsets across men and women across the globe on the importance of inclusive leadership. She began her career, very similar to mine, only I was in finance, as the first woman in sales at Sony. And she became the first woman sales manager and was highly awarded with achievements across sales categories. Post her career at Sony, and for 30 years, Barbara has worked with over 51 associates that have partnered with organizations to transform cultures, leadership behavior, and creating gender balance across organization and organizational levels. They have together facilitated over 8,000 workshops and conducted thousands of leadership assessments and executive coaching sessions. Barbara is the CEO of the Gender Intelligence Group, and I have known her, the pleasure of knowing her for over 2 decades, and she is a personal friend and mentor. In addition, she is the chair emeritus and current member of the Women's Leadership Board at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is, I think, how I first met Barbara. And she's received so many accolades, it would take me all morning long to give you the list. She is the author of a number of books. The most recent book we're going to be talking about today, The Brilliance of the Female Mind. Please welcome Barbara Annis.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the intro.
Hey, Barbara, I'm so glad we could be together. I know we've been together in Utah not so long ago, so nice to see you here. Obviously, we're here to talk about so much, but first and foremost, your latest book, The Brilliance of the Female Mind. So, of course, I read it. I'm so excited to dig into a lot of the content of which today, but this is, I think I have this right, your 6th book.
Yeah.
So why this book for you now at this point of your career?
So there are 2 reasons for this book. One is to continue to shift mindsets in the world around truly valuing the brilliance that women and girls bring to this world of ours. And we'll dig in deep on that. That's one. Second is we need women's brains more than ever. And you'll see that when we talk about, the brain differences and so on, the why behind that. And we need to really create different thinking in this world. The old paradigm of great minds think alike should be gone, period, full stop. And it should be about great minds think unalike. And women bring a beautiful, brilliant unalikeness of thinking to this world, both in the workplace, at home, etc. Yeah.
Well, and of course, I love the title. And I'm excited to dig into some of the science around this difference because we do live in a world now where certain words like gender, words like diversity, equity, inclusion are quickly disappearing from the lexicon and also mandated in certain cases to not be used and not be funded, obviously. And we're going to dig into a little bit of that later. Yet you were a pioneer and really coined the term gender intelligence.
Yeah.
So, and that resonated with me so deeply. So explain sort of how this way of thinking about difference sort of came to be and how you came up with this term gender intelligence.
Yes, it was really an important thing. It happened about 25 years ago. Prior to that, I was really looking at gender equality. How can we create more equitable workplaces and equal rights for women and so on. And I was on a stage somewhere in Silicon Valley, and I just remember thinking to myself, wow, We need to reframe this. The reason we need to reframe it is that gender equality, it's like we're fighting for something. You know what I mean? We're trying to fight to get attention for equality. What about gender intelligence? Like, who wouldn't want to be gender intelligent? So it became a different kind of listening and a different approach to it when I coined the term gender intelligent. And both men and women were curious. So it created this open curiosity without the weight of gender equality. And of course, as you can see here on this slide, it also created a domino effect, which I love, 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 that it's not only about men and women being wired differently, but what about all the other differences that we have, right, in our world, where we can accept, value, and engage, in particular, all kinds of differences, such as autistic colleagues, LGBTQ, whichever, ethnicity, culture, etc., is a part of it. So I love that it created that domino effect.
Yeah, and I feel like your work, and I think it's one of the reasons it's resonated so much with me over the years, having attended so many of your workshops, deep dives. You were so committed. I mean, you were the most committed person I've ever met when it comes to, again, creating more inclusive cultures, but really sort of emphasizing the power of difference. And I want to get into the science, but before we do, I just want to spend another minute on sort of this current climate of this, because I think we're all searching for some new language and trying to navigate what I think the common ground that we all feel, which is like everyone deserves an opportunity to reach their potential, to be seen, to have a sense of belonging. And before we dive into the neuroscience, which I think everyone's going to be super excited about, we have some great slides. Let's just anchor it a little bit more in sort of where we are now, and in particular, what this means for women's leadership at this moment.
Yes, yes. So, and I know it's a little US centric in terms of the conversation we're in right now, but it is kind of ricocheting around the world as well. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
People are watching, people are watching. The good news is that our clients are staying the course. Not only are they staying the course, but they're actually deepening their commitment, right? Which I love. And the whole rolling out of workshops, men and women working as colleagues, has kind of accelerated in the last few months, which I find quite interesting. So back to your point, gender difference is not going to go away anytime soon. It's just not, right? And you can deny words, but you can also reframe words, right? So we're in the middle of reframing D&I, which I know we're going to get to that question a little later, is how do you transform that in a way that everyone, yes, feels valued and a sense of belonging, without calling it Black Lives Matter, but just different thinking and valuing those differences is super important. But I don't think, at least I'm not going to be at the effect of what's happening. I'm just not, I'm just not, right? I'm navigating this, taking the high road and speaking the truth, and that's, the more we can do that, the better it is, because otherwise we're going to create some really, really almost intentional blind spots, do you know?
Yeah.
And that's worrisome, and I'm not going there,
Well, and we can't be afraid to show up in the workplaces and have challenging conversations. And I feel like so much of your work is anchored in very practical strategies that help organizations innovate, thrive, make more money, create folks that are better listeners, better communicators. So all of this is anchored in human flourishing in the workplace. So, and I think we've lost the narrative on that a little bit too, because I think there are strategies and it's the work that you do is help organizations thrive. People feel loyal to the organizations. They're more productive. The companies make more money. This is all a virtuous, positive cycle.
And, and the wonderful thing about it is that once you have the eyes to see it, it's just not going to go away ever. It just doesn't go away, So when I hear men and women say, I wish I knew this 30 years ago, or 20 or 40, or, I could have been a better boss, a better colleague, a better partner, etc. Right? I'd love for that conversation to disappear and get this knowledge out there. And as we, announce up level, I think there's going to be a huge opportunity there. But once, and of course, we're going to show you some brain slides that will never go away from your brain ever. You're going to see go, what? Seriously? Is this possible? Right? So I love that kind of imprint, that aha moment that kind of imprints in you, right? which of course I did deliberately in the TED Talk, right? In showing some of these brain slides. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into them. We don't usually show slides, so I'm excited to dig in. And that is, again, having been in many spaces, and we're, men and women together, all types of folks together. When people see these slides, you hear gasping and laughing, and there was a visceral reaction, which I know we're not going to be able to capture today. So let's start with this one. So Barbara, anchor for us a little bit, maybe before we jump into this slide.
Yeah. Sure.
Like how you came upon the science, the brain science that sort of fuels and informs your work and sort of framing gender intelligence and in the way that you do. And then we'll jump into this slide.
So my biggest aha moment was in 1990, where I discovered that there were brain differences between men and women. And I resisted it, by the way. It was like, no, let's not go there, because it might hurt women, right? But when I got into the neuroscience, I went, oh my goodness, this affects every part of our body. Every body system is different, right? And the slide that you see here now is the latest piece of research that AI now can tell, as you can see here, with 90% accuracy. I used to say 80-20. There's a bell curve here, right? And now, just as of last year, it's they now can see it 90%. And we'll dig a little deeper into that. But, in 1990, we didn't have AI. In 1990, we had MRI scans, we had X-rays, we had PET scans, where we could see, and that cost a lot of money and took a lot of time, right? But since 90, we've covered over 1 million brains, in 30 countries and all continents. So the body of research is incredible. I mean, it truly is incredible. And we need to make it available in Main Street, to be available, right? So we're really figuring out how we can do that at a click of a button so that people can see that, because boys and girls learn differently. We'll cover that when we look at some of these slides. And that's so important to understand that. Otherwise, we're blaming boys for being boys and how they learn, and vice versa. So I have a lot to say about this. But this is the latest scan. And what's really curious about this is that when Stanford announced this, they said, oh my God, brand new research about AI now can detect these 90% accuracy rates. And it's not brand new. It's been around since 1990. We just used a different methodology to do the research.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. And I just was with someone who actually worked at the Khan Academy at their school. I can't remember the name of it last night, but as an educator, amazing friend of mine. And she was saying, and does coaching around colleges, she said neuroscience is actually one of the hottest majors now. And because of the research and our ability to actually look at the brain. Yeah. And my daughter actually is a neuroscience major, just graduated and is working in that field as well. Like the amount of discovery that's coming with respect to the brain, I think you're right. It's been around a long time, but now it's just exploding.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So I want to go into this next slide. But before we do, I just want to say one thing that shows up for me and did show up for me when, you recently gave a talk here in Utah, is how I feel uncomfortable sometimes talking about women's brains and men's brains. And I know there is a spectrum and there is difference, but I think what makes me uncomfortable is so often when it comes to gender, but also to the sex, that difference means inferior. Right. And I think that's why I love your work. And I think we have to get this really hard in our heads that we've been socialized in a way that means difference is bad if it's not the normative, which in the normative in the culture that we live in is male, and the normative in terms of power and organizations is white male. So I think they're great white men. This is not anti anything, but I really just want to name that some of the discomfort, and even see if we go through these slides, if it shows up for people, is because we've been socialized to see difference as a negative, and difference when it comes to male, female as inferior.
I agree with that, Jackie. And one more thing that I want to add about that I really think kind of puts the edge in it too, is we were brought up in an egalitarian way, right? So equal. I mean, I'm Danish, you can hear my accent, right? So I was brought up in Copenhagen, and we were taught about gender equality and egalitarian, and egalitarian meant sameness, right? There was actually a book out back in the 80s called Androgynous Manager, where they wanted everybody just to fit into one thing, dress this way, just horrible messages in there. And what I love, is that, as you said, not only the neuroscience, which is accessible now, right? So you can see it, right? And the beautiful thing about the neuroscience is that they went further. They didn't just go, okay, we see that there are men and women, boys and girls. What other differences are there? What about autistic brains? What about LGBTQ2 brains? I mean, it just opened up a freedom to say, wait a minute, I was born this way, people, right? So I think that's important, but we can go into the slides if you're ready for that.
Yeah. So we don't have a ton of them, but you have a ton of them. And I'm sure people will be like, more Barbara after this, because I'm always more Barbara after I spend time with you. But let's go. But that's you talk about this one. You set this one up, because I love how you talk about this, and it always gets people smiling or laughing or agreeing.
Sure. So one of the things, did I just lose you?
No.
Oh, okay. One of the things that, let me just get out of this for a sec, just so I'm here. There. One of the things that I ask all over the world before I show this slide, I say, how many women have ever asked a male colleague or a male partner when he's relaxing, or a boy when he's relaxing, what are you thinking? What do they say? And I hear the echo in the room saying, well, they say nothing. And I said, well, that's actually true. Men can actually think about nothing. So you look at this resting brain of male brain, there's very little neuron activity going on other than digesting and breathing and all of that. And look at the female brain at rest, it's on fire, right? So what's important to understand here is that men and women, boys and girls, de-stress differently, right? Men need to take that time out, right, to replenish their testosterone. And we need to tend and befriend, right, to talk it out, right, to replenish our oxytocin. So it's just different de-stress hormones and different ways of doing it. And often we misinterpret it, man, and we say, oh, well, if he says nothing, he's obviously hiding, or he doesn't want to communicate, or he's being rude, whatever it is that we assume in that. So it's a powerful imprint brain that for most people, if not all that I've ever heard say, that never leaves my mind,
Well, and when I saw this, I was like, oh, that explains a lot in my own relationship for sure. And just to anchor one of your previous books was a book that you wrote with John Gray, who is renowned for, Women for Venus, Men Are for Mars, which came out, I think, 20 something years ago. Yep. And you wrote a book, Same Words, Different Language, A Proven Guide for Creating Gender Intelligence at Work. Yep. And this is something like for me, too, like we all know, and again, it's not just one or the other. There's a spectrum in all of this, but we all know at some level that's true. I mean, for me, this slide, I showed it, obviously my husband was there and he's like, see, like he was so happy. I'm like, and that this was true because he said that's true for him, and the way he does really need to de-stress. I need to, my brain is like this and it's a problem, for me, I call it monkey brain. But I would love to have a MRI attached to my brain, and it's a good thing. But when I relax, what happens, and we're going to go into another slide on that. So I'm going to save that for when we get to that next slide. But
yeah,
okay.
I do want to say, I thought I had a male brain. So when I first read the brain difference, I went, wait a minute, I'm analytical, I'm linear, right? I'm transactional, all that stuff. And I had my brain scan, and I actually had a total female brain. But I had adopted my behavior when I was at Sony, in a male paradigm, to operate like a male brain, right? So it was a big, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but it was a big aha moment for myself going, oh my goodness, we've been trying to fit into this box. You know what I mean? And it really unleashed my creativity when I saw that, in a very different way, which we'll cover.
Well, thank you. And I also worked, as many of us do, that are of a certain age now. And when you grew up in certain fields, like I did in finance, I mean, there are cultures, and if the cultures are dominated by a certain person, and this is for men that work in female-dominated cultures, and oppositely, then the behaviors, the norm, what's normalized, talking it through, having lots of social time, like all of that, becomes what's accepted, right? As well, it's dominant, but it's just normalized. So, and sometimes after I learned a lot about your work, I'll just say personally, I don't know if I would ever say I had a male brain. I think I survived and thrived in a male dominated environment, but it also took a lot more energy for me because it wasn't as natural for me to figure out how to navigate and understand those, perhaps some of those behaviors and rules and ways of being that were not authentic to me. And I think this is, the famous quote, I think that, I don't know if it's Ann Richards or said, about women in a male dominated area, we have to do everything, men do, but backwards and in high heels.
Yes.
But I just want to recognize, because it's still true today. And this is about understanding culture, right? Understanding those dominant systems. And so much of your work is just naming and creating a curiosity about it. And understanding that if you're not part of that group that creates those dominant ways of being, that's hard. And you need to put a lot of extra work in to figure it out. So I think it's a lot about where this lands in organizational cultures is something that I'm curious about for you too, because it's, okay, this is true, but then what?
Well, this is the thing, and I always say this, and I said it in the same words, different language, we're putting the cart before the horse, right? Because we think if we can just go and recruit a bunch of great women into the culture, that will handle it. No, it doesn't handle it. Women either will survive in that, not thrive, but survive, because it's exhausting when you have to contort yourself into a male thinking, right? I just spoke last week to a member of a huge company. She's on the board, and she said, when I go to those meetings, I have to do male think, and it's exhausting, right? So we work with boards to embed gender intelligence in boards and executives, as you well know, right? But to really shift that paradigm to that difference thinking is super important. And as we'll show you some more slides on that.
Yeah. So let's get through, and I want to have lots of time for questions. Just, we have people here moderating the chat with us. We're going to bring your questions in and have lots of time for that. Well, let's do a little bit more of the science, because a lot of people are just not aware of it. And if there are questions about it, please feel free to post it in the chat and we'll try to bring it in. So talk to this slide, Barbara.
Yeah. So a lot of society had conversation about nature versus nurture. Right. And they thought that if my son, my firstborn, his name is Christian, I wanted him to be a gender equality boy. You know what I mean? So no guns, no trucks, no nothing, right, etc. Right. And then, I gave him a Ken doll and he would pull the leg off and go boom, 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 kind of thing, like as a pistol kind of thing, or throw it down the stairs to see how it dive bombed down, right? That gravity thing. And this slide is so powerful, just to give you a sense of what we're looking at here, because we're actually looking at pregnancy. So these are pregnant mothers in the second and third trimester. And now that they have the MRI scans to safely look at this, and many countries in Europe have done this, and the US, saw the brain development in the second and third trimester, dramatic differences between male and female fetuses, right? So it doesn't mean that the male brain doesn't develop, it just develops differently, right? In a different modality than the female brain. So I think it kind of takes out this nurture nature thing, out of the equation, saying, they're hardwiring nature that we're born this way. And it's a good thing. And we can actually see the female brain with sensory input, cognition, and memory retrieval. And we can see that if you have young children, you'll find that your girls develop language much quicker than your boys, right? Boys do catch up. But just to understand these differences, and when we look at the next slide, if you want anything to add to that one, Jackie, we can go here.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is really the one, if anything you remember this one, right? So men tend to use convergent thinking. So if you think about that, and that's the blue side of the brain here versus the orange, you think about that, that's a linear thinking, that's weighing pros and cons, that's being in a meeting saying, yeah, well, this doesn't fit here. That's men saying, wait a minute, Jackie, what does that have to do with this conversation? Because you're diverging, right? You're looking at, wait a minute, if we do this, how could it impact over here, right? So women have this quantum thinking approach to connect things in a more impactful way that often men don't hear or see in women's brains, or as they communicate it out, right? One of your, it's not the employer that you work with, but one of your competitive employer had a woman CFO, and she was doing divergent thinking. And you remember with the crash in 2008, and she was saying, I know you know her. And she was saying, wait a minute, guys, we can't do this. We can't do this. What impact would it have here? She was labeled as not being a team player, right? So when men, and this is if the men who are listening to this, try this on. You're in a meeting. Ask the women what they notice and listen. And you're going to hear some pretty rich, good stuff. Many CEOs will check in with 2 women in every meeting after the meeting. What did you notice in that meeting? And some of the women will say, you know what? This person didn't buy into it. And this person was asking this question, but there was something else we should revisit. That kind of thing, right? And that's divergent thinking. And now in business schools, not all, but most, they're actually experimenting with these divergent convergent. MIT is doing a lot of work around gender balanced teams, where they actually see innovative thinking increases when you have greater gender balance and gender intelligent teams when you use this type of thought process. So a powerful, powerful insight and slide.
Yeah, I love this so much. And you can take that down, actually, just to engage in a little dialogue. I think that's going to be the end of our slides, but just on this point, before we talk about, again, in the book, you go in, by hemisphere, and let's get into a little bit of that, because I think people are going to think it's really cool, but there's 42 slides we could show on that. But just to anchor around this divergent convergent thinking, and again, your folks that are watching, I know if you're on replay, you won't be able, to post your questions, but perhaps, we'll still answer. I bet there's a lot of the same ones. This was really a light bulb for me. And I've done so many tests. I've done personality tests. I've done thinking talents. I've done, Enneagrams, like all of this stuff, right? And I'm so curious actually on some of those tools, because I have a feeling there are like certain profiles are probably more likely for one gender versus another. But I am that person, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I see it now as a strength, and as a trader, actually, I think it really served me well in many ways. It also meant I was probably more risk aware, and I'll just translate this into a really quick analogy.
Yep.
Did some work about 25 years ago. Why so few women in as managers of money, right? Did this whole report, still true today. Women were not cattle. In those roles. And one of the things, there's lots of research in this, are women or men better actually managing money?
Yes.
And this was a big study, 2009, I think. And we partnered with HFR, Hedge Fund Research, actually to look at it. And there was this big headline, like, women are actually better managing money than men. Wow. And I would argue, I'm not arguing for that. But what they did say is women, what they couched it as, well, there was a headline that said women are more risk averse, and it wasn't the true. Women were more risk measured. Yes. And how it sort of, when I connected your work with this work, and it was very, very true for me. Mm-hmm. And it's true. My husband and I, we talk markets, we talk finance all the time. Mm-hmm. He goes down and he's in a theme, and he was an emerging markets trader, and he'll go deep and he'll convict and he'll get it. And then I'll be like, but what about this? And what about this? And so I'll talk myself out of a lot of that. Yeah. And by definition, even in the way I traded years ago, I was more little bets with the mindfulness of what could go really wrong. And so many of the other guys I worked with were all in. And this is really justified. And certainly one could say that even the global financial crisis was that divergent thinking. Like nothing could ever go wrong. No one was whistling about what the problems were. So I just invite folks to really take that slide into their own lives, and into situations where you can get, it was often called groupthink, whatever those might be. But let's expand that a little bit about how this plays out in the workplace, and how you, with the coaching that you do and the work with organizations, right, that you can bring out, because at the end of the day, we want both. Yes, right. That's the point.
We absolutely want both, and what I call it, women tend to be more risk wise, right? And the reason that I say that is that when you look at the brain and the prefrontal cortex, which is here, is the executive function of the brain, which is more connected and larger in women, right? So, and what happens there is that women look at consequential thinking, and that's exactly what you were describing when you were trading, right? So if I do this, right? So men and boys, I mean, we see this all the time, young boys taking crazy risk on different things, physical, you know what I mean? And girls will say, yeah, I don't think I'll be doing that anytime soon. I'm good. You know what I mean? And of course, in adulthood, that kind of plays out. So often you'll see women being more risk wise, but it's being misinterpreted as being more cautious. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Versus more thorough, versus more interconnected, right? Back to the divergent thinking, right? And I see that so often, even in classroom of boys and girls together, that girls tend to look at that saying, no, I'm going to break my leg if I do that, And so it's a really important thing. And you're right about the brilliance of the combination of these two approaches is where the congruence truly occur, right? That he looks at it this way, she looks at it that way. We have the best solutions when we have the both brains, at work and at the table. Yeah.
Well, and I've heard you say, I think in your last session here in Utah, which was like 100 plus people, was meaty and so many slides. I think somehow some of this showed, and people love to talk about their kids, right? Their boys and their girls differently. But I think it really becomes true. Like this is not only applicable in the workplace, but even in parenting, right? Like girls oftentimes have to be honored for thinking, and being, as you said, I think more risk, not measured. I think you said another word, risk aware, and be encouraged to try things. And oppositely, boys sometimes, maybe it's not a good idea, to, go down that ski jump before you've, taken a little one and go off the top one. But the ability to assess risk has dramatic implications, and your propensity to take risk. Yes. Right. And I think about this in so many ways with career, with founding a company, and I do think like sometimes I lie awake in my monkey brain at night saying why or not, and we're going to talk a little bit about Uplevel and a tech company founded by, a woman later, but it's like, why are not women starting, like just going out, freaking going for it and starting all these companies? Well, some of it's up here, of course, yep. Reality of accessing capital, yep. But this plays out, and without naming it and seeing it, we are doing ourselves a disservice, yeah. The organizations a disservice, and the world we live in such a disservice because we attribute it to things and label things that end up being negative, right? Yeah. Both in the extreme of male behavior and female behavior, or masculine or feminine, or whatever it is, when really there's such an anchoring and beauty, in acknowledging sort of this difference and showing up curious about it, right?
Yes. Yes. Also, one thing that you point out, which I think is important, women do tend to fall into certain pitfalls, and it's in the book, obviously, right? Where we are unaware that we might create self-imposed limitations. So, for example, one, is what we call female rumination, right? So the hippocampus is larger in women and more connected. That's the memory centers of the brain. So women tend to remember everything, right? And then add worry on top of that, right? Then you got the female rumination. So I literally had to do it for myself because I'm there, I literally have to say, okay, is this worthwhile for me to worry about? Is it going to make any difference whatsoever in my life if I continue worrying about this? Is there any cheese down that tunnel? And if the answer is no, I let it go.
I can't tell you how many times you said that to me, especially in the past year when I'm deep in my dark hole of rumination and anxiety, yes. And fear and just friends. Barbara, I'm on the phone. Barbara, help me. Like, she's one of my people. She goes, Jackie, is there any cheese at the end of that tunnel? And I'm like, no. She's like, get the fuck out of that tunnel. Turn around.
Yeah. So anyway, those would be really useful for the audience and for the ones who listen to this later on, is to learn about these different, I don't remember which chapter it is, and to share it with your world. Because again, once we have the insights, the aha, we won't fall into these potential traps, right? That are very, very difficult to get back out of, So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I have this, I want to bring in some questions because I think some are lit up. I love this question. Sorry, I don't know who gave us, but thank you. What do you see as the biggest opportunity for women stepping into leadership roles in the next decade? What do you see changing? And how can companies and ERGS support and retain women given these differences?
Love that question. So a couple of things. It's so interesting. So I was talking to one of the senior members of Costco, and he had read the book. His first name is Mike, and he said, how do we get companies ready for women? How do we do that? Because we're not doing it. You know what I mean? Because when you look at education, and it's in the book, women have been graduating in greater numbers for almost 30 years, and it's going this way. It's going this way, right? So back to your question, women, I mean, I'm not big on promoting my own book, but read the darn book. I'm telling you.
You can promote your own book. That's
there you go.
right here.
That's another thing that women tend not to do, by the way, but that's a whole other thing, right? We don't self-promote as much as men do. But anyway, back to the question. So there's a readiness for you in being, ready for that new world. And it's a new world. It's a paradigm shift. Women's emotional intelligence, women's way of collaboration, women's way of inclusion, women's way of breaking down silos, women's way of breaking hierarchies, like all of that stuff is how women are making a difference right now, right here, in this moment, in this world of ours, right? And it's going to accelerate. It's going to, I swear this is the decade for women. It is going to accelerate. So that's one. Second, pick the company. Pick your employer. You interview your employer. Don't have them only interview you, but interview your employer and ask about these things. When you go to the doctor, there's a chapter on women's health. Ask when you're being given a prescription saying, do you know anything about gender research with this medication? What side effects I will have versus men? Like ask, because the data is out there. It's just that people aren't looking at it, right? I had a friend, a doctor, a woman friend who you would also know, asking her doctor for this prescription. And she said, let me check. And she went online. She came back into the treatment room and she said, I'm giving you the wrong stuff. I'm giving you the wrong stuff. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
It's a heart medication, for God's sake. I'm giving you the wrong stuff, right? So to answer that question in a long-winded way is be prepared, learn about this, do deep dive on this, and then pick your employer, right, around this gender intelligence. Because if they say something like, we're looking for what's a good fit, your antenna should go way up. Way up. You say, okay, what kind of fit is that? And then ask what the competencies are. And then check for yourself, does this resonate for me, right? Or am I ending up contorting myself yet again? Because we have 25-year-olds who feel like they're a foreigner in their own country in certain employers, right? It's not just, a generational thing. It's happening to all of us. So beautiful question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'd love to add a little bit more on this, and there's so much more to add on. And thank you. Please keep the questions coming, because I think it's interesting that all this is true, and I think it feels true. And it's not about saying the way men do things are wrong necessarily, right? Like I think people show up, they do the best they can, they know what they know, and especially if that knowing is so reinforced as being the right way. Right. And I think that's, for me, something big like this. And especially now in our culture where all of a sudden we're hitting this reset because of, the administration, let's just name it, and saying that D&I isn't working. There's a whole, gender ideology around there that's like negative. I'm not sure what the evidence of that is, but, it's just this woke, whatever D&I gender culture is destroying our country. And if that's replaced by what's working is right and good versus this is not working, let's look at it differently. When the goal, like what is the goal of dismantling things? I asked that. And if the goal is to really do what we said on the outside, right? Like is create cultures and organizations that thrive, where people work well together, where they love their work, so they're more productive, they're loyal, that if that is the goal, then that's a great thing. But that's not, I think this is my deepest concern in this moment, that we're throwing out, as we said, the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And this gets into, and how can companies, because if it's technically illegal, whatever that means, to have now any gender subgroup receive anything that's whatever, what is really going to go on in companies? I mean, I think some of them are going to they might call it something else, but do the work. Or perhaps a better question is, what does it look like to do the work that works around this?
Okay, so I will go there right now. Okay.
Go.
$8 billion is spent a year in diversity initiatives every year in the US alone. And there's no correlation to it having the kind of impact that they were expecting, right? Does that mean that there are certain things that work? Yes. And here are the things that work, right? Creating affinity groups and all things like that really hasn't had a correlation to inclusion. It's had a correlation to separation, right? So if you want to create inclusion and a sense of belonging, there are 4 things that are on top of the heat map that correlates to that. One is leadership. Leaders set the tone for culture, period, full stop. You can go into a meeting and the executive senior leader can come in and set the tone for that moment, right? Horrible, not, whatever. So leadership accountability on congruent leadership, which means being congruent with your intention, your behavior. And that's a learning component to that, right? So it's not just quota thing, but it's actually leadership behavior. Are you setting the tone for a culture where women thrive? Or anybody who's different thrive, like no kidding thrive, right? And I always say, 85% of consumer spending is done by women, and in Japan it's 92%, right? So, and when women feel valued, women don't buy brands, they join them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
I'll give an example. I mean, American Express, I have an American Express Platinum card. I love that, and I worked with that company for 7 years, not in it, but as a consultant, of course. But the way they embraced gender intelligence in the DNA of the culture blew my mind. So it wasn't just we went in and did some workshops and planted some seeds. They took it, they embraced it, they embedded it, they did it, So leadership accountability is one. Sponsorship, we really need to invite men to truly be comfortable with sponsoring women that they, have lots of respect and credibility for. Right now, #MeToo has kind of dampened that for a bit, right? But how can we truly accelerate that sponsorship? And how can women as sponsees be more self-initiated in their career? Because companies are not going to take care of you. You have to be more self-initiated, which is a whole other hour of conversation, right? And then, of course, talent management, and this is the AI world that you and I are very passionate about embedding gender intelligence into it, because right now AI tools on talent management are male coded, literally coded into male. So if I interview you and I take you through an AI process, you're not going to make the list. And you're like this brilliant mind. Do you know what I mean? Because it's a bro white male, actually not even just white, but it's a male content, that the tools that we've seen. And we can add more links to that, by the way, if you wish. Harvard Kennedy School did some interesting studies around AI and the male brain, so we can do that. And then the last piece is really learning, like how can we, men and women as colleagues, learn how to work effectively together. SAP did a brilliant job where they trained 5,000 managers around the world called Men and Women Working Together. And we had every country involved in that. It was really so powerful. Not only did the culture shift, but the amount of women, that they recruited and retained, as engineers went from like 7% to 26%, right, in record time. So, and that's a big global company, right? So, yeah.
Well, it's so important, and I'm trying to. There's some beautiful comments that I'm seeing in the chat, and I think, and again, we always operate, especially here in the U.S. with what's going on. It's really a difficult time, and I think people are very confused how to show up.
Yeah.
And I think you said some really core things about what makes organizations thrive. Is this: we have to work together, and no one wants to work. If you don't feel like you belong and you feel like you're being targeted or not seen or not valued. That word I want to like write a treatise on like the word value, because I think why people leave, and really good people leave, is they don't feel valued, and they probably aren't valued because that's reflected in compensation. So I think how you just said those 4 things and recentering organizations to focus and think about, is it culture? Is that what you would call it? And can we even use the word inclusive? Like, give me some language here, Barbara, that feels current and can not alienate. And I'm not, because I don't want the work to stop. I don't want people to get scared and defensive and go back into their cubbies, rather than showing up with commitment and curiosity to make their workplaces, not only work for them, but for others.
Yeah. So D&I is transforming itself as we speak. For the companies, we have 123 companies going, no, we're staying the course, and we're reframing it. Pride, joy, and belonging. Pride, joy, and belonging in everything that you do in this company, right? And they still look at the lens, because you gotta look, so we have this diagnostic process where we ask 72 questions, right? And we look at all the demographics and women, and men and women, different ethnic groups, how men and women are feeling. And women of color tend to score things way lower than men of color. They still use all those lenses to get the intelligence out, so they know exactly what they're solving for. And of course, the how, which I just spoke about, how to do it, right? I am not worried about the current administration squashing that. I'm not, right? There are smart people in these companies who are figuring it out and reframing in a way that it still accelerates inclusion and belonging. Don't worry about it. It's happening. I see it every day.
Well, that gives me some hope. I'm not sure I'm as hopeful. I know a lot of people have lost jobs, but to the point, they were jobs that were set up to fail, right, to some degree as well. And I think there's such an opportunity, and thank you for that language. And it still is human capital management, right? Maybe we just come back to that in a way that is different. And comes, that is anchored, I think, a lot more in science, right? And that's, again, a big reason to read this book, is you're going to, geek out on the science part of that. So thank you for giving me a little hope. Thank you, Jenny, for hope. So I've got another, I think, great question. We've got about 13 minutes, and please continue. This is going to live on. So leave your comments and questions. And even if we don't get to them today, because there is somewhat of a lag, we'll try to look at them and address them in a subsequent post here on LinkedIn. So the question is, are there any resources for teaching or presenting this in a school setting? What if kids understood this younger? And this is from Heidi. I hope I'm pronouncing this. DeGraffrand. I hope I pronounced that. Great question, Heidi.
Yeah. Yes, that is exactly what we need to do. And we are doing it. So Pearson Education is doing a lot of work in schools right now in educating teachers. And as you know, elementary school teachers are around 92% women, right? And my daughter is a teacher, and she's seen it live, where they will label a boy as being a problem when he's just different. He just learns differently. Like, boys can't have a lot of noise going on, right? And they need that kind of time out. You saw the brain, right? They need to tune out their brain and learn kinesthetically, right? When girls learn through communication, like they can sit quietly and listen to the teacher and learn, right? Very difficult for most boys to do that, right? As an example. So that's that. Gurian Institute, there are two things. Gurian, Gurian Institute. And then also Dr. Leonard Sachs has some beautiful books around boys and girls. The one I really like is called Why Gender Matters.
Yeah.
So it's SAX, Leonard. So those would be the ones to go after for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe we can work together, Barbara, to create a bit of a resource list for folks wanting to dig deeper. I'm hearing lots of nods.
It's in the back of the book if you want to.
Yes, you have that. So I want to come back to something you said, because it's so top of mind for me right now, and so relevant to so many people, and just such an amazing example of why gender intelligence matters, right? How thinking about sex, who you're serving, what's your situation, what's true for you. And this gets into personalized medicine, right?
Yes.
So personalized medicine is obviously exploding, because why? Everyone's bodies are different. But how it's showing up, and I'm going to have Jillian post something in the chat. We both have a mutual friend named Carolee Friedlander who started something called Women's Health Access Matters. And she has produced so many reports. And this is for me, like when I learned this, decades ago, the light bulb went out. It's one of those things you can't unsee, but it speaks to when you said, what doctors and medication, that for decades, for almost ever, the medical universe treated women like small men. And
Yes.
This is a classic thing about the seatbelts too, right? Like the test dummies were men so that women could get killed because of the seatbelts, or where the balloon exploded. So there's so much work being done now to amplify and say women's bodies are different.
Yes.
Disease manifests very differently, especially heart disease, cancer. Of course, there are women's diseases, especially like endometriosis, which is, a silent, talk about silent suffering of women.
Yep.
Let's talk about endometriosis, et cetera. So I just want to point that out, because if you put on your glasses, and dare I say gender glasses, but glass difference glasses, and there's questions about LGBTQ and what we're learning about that. But if you accept difference as a good thing and something that's going to lead to innovation, lead to improving the quality of lives, lead to more inclusive workplaces, say a little bit more in your huge body of work about people that get it. And all of a sudden that light bulb goes off. And I know you've worked with leaders because once you get it, it's a good thing for your business. It's a good thing for you. It's a good thing for your relationships. It's just such a good thing. And yet we're stuck in this badness of difference and judgment of difference that's just breaking my heart.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've said for decades, it's not about blame, it's about understanding. But we have to understand. So we need to really practice learning agility and be able to stand in each other's shoes. But what I find is that when you get a sense of what's going on, so you mentioned 80% of immune disease is in women. And it can take up to 6 years for women to get the proper diagnosis, simply because there's lack of gender intelligent medicine. There is gender intelligent medicine, trust me, out there. We just have to ask the questions, I'll give you a beautiful example. Famous documentary filmmaker friend, Leslie Chilcott, her mother. She had been at a session with me, and a few weeks later, she was with her mom. And background, 72% of women who have heart attacks have very different symptoms than men. They don't have the crushing chest. They've got stomach flu-like symptoms, really very different symptoms. And if hospitals don't know that, and this happens. So Leslie takes her mom to the emergency, saying, my mom is not feeling well. And she says, it's very unusual. There's something weird, right? And they label her as having an anxiety attack and some stomach issues, right? And she said, I think it's her heart. And they say, no. I said, is there any heart doctor here that knows anything about gender intelligent medicine? She took her mother out of the emergency. She phoned around hospitals in Los Angeles area to find a doctor who knew about heart differences between men and women. And she was having a massive coronary heart attack. Get that? She's living today. If you didn't know, you didn't know, she would not be alive. So it's so important for us to, talk about this. My sister-in-law at 38 died on the front lawn of her house, getting into her car on a Monday morning, and she was feeling ill over the weekend. She had a massive coronary, and they thought that she, just needed to take some Tylenol, right? So we start asking different questions. We start asking, saying, well, if these differences are truly the case, how can we value them? How can we encourage them in the workplace? And we have 62 studies done on gender balanced teams at all the different levels. The correlation to not only profits, but safety, mental health, wellness, feeling valued, which is the number one reason why women leave, number one. Now, it doesn't mean that men don't say it. They just tend to say better opportunity elsewhere. But women will say, I don't feel valued, We can solve all these things once we have the eyes to see it. But we can't come from a blame. It's really important. We need to learn and understand that these differences are there, and we can do something about it. We can make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I just want to shout out one book, so we'll post it in the chat because I met this woman through Carolee, actually. There's a recent book called All in Her Head, and I think it's Elizabeth Coleman. It's going to get posted in the chat.
Great.
And it is all about this. There's quite a few books now. There's one called The
Alison McGregor's book is amazing.
Yeah.
And her
We have
TED
to put that list together. And I just encourage everyone, I mean, this is for us to, as women, to take our health in our own hands and educate ourselves and ask those questions. Because it literally, I mean, I hear story after story of suffering because, especially in the health space, because of being gaslit, that it's literally, that's the title of the book, it's all in your head.
Yes.
So this is so important. And if we have to care about people. I think this is what it comes down to, and animals and our planet. So let's just be this big shout out for a care world where we actually care about each other. But that is at the core, of this work that I find so exciting. So I want to start to wrap up in the last 5 minutes, and I'll apologize in advance if we didn't get to a lot of the questions. So Barbara, I want to talk a little bit. You and I have been meeting a lot lately, together with another colleague, Shibi Rao, who created Uplevel, because we're really thinking about how to bring your work of not like 30 years. I mean, you've been on this train. You're not like, just got on at the station. You would literally built the train. But how, in your view, can we bring more people? You authored 6 books. You're one human, to bring scale to your work, and how are you thinking about it? Because you're a couple of years older than I am, if I might just say that out loud. Just a tiny, and we're looking pretty smoking for our age, I'm saying. But how are you thinking about scaling your work? Because what I sense of you now is almost more energy now than 25 years ago, and commitment, and dare I say legacy, that this work has to get out there. And that because I know and maybe you can tell one more story about the impact it can make.
Yeah. I mean, it's just unbelievable the difference it can make, and I've seen it in so many organizations around the world, right? Yes. So using AI, using a tool that can accelerate getting this learning out there is super important to me. It's super important for me for girls to know who they are and the amazing, brilliant minds they have, and often girls tend not to go there, because why? Well, it's in the book too. We scrutinize ourselves so much, right? We're constantly self-ruminating, scrutinizing, So to really not only have the insights of the brilliance, but also the tools around how to expand that in your health, so many blind spots in medicine right now. And, I have a lot to say about that. So this tool, my dream is that this is available to everybody, who will have a propensity to want to learn about this. And the teachers, I mean, you name it, moms, fathers, I can't tell you how many times fathers said, oh my God, I had no idea that my daughter, I'm parenting my daughter the same way I'm parenting my son, right? And I had no idea that she needs different things, as a parent, and me as a father, right? As another example. So I think it's so important, and I can end it with, actually we have 2 minutes left, but just give you real quick. So Johan Björklund, head of North America sales at Ericsson, saw my talk in Silicon Valley and came up to me and said, I've never even thought of having women on my team, on my sales team, never. And he said, I never even considered it. And I said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you try it for a year and measure it? So he tried it for a year and measured it. And he brought more women in, and he expanded not only the inclusion of the team, but the dynamics of the team about brilliance and performance and innovative thinking, accelerated, and they made an additional $850 million a year for that year. He measured it. He's an engineer. He measured it, right? So, and I'm not, money is not what promotes me for this. It's really about the intelligence that empowers both men and women and boys and girls. That's what I'm up for.
Oh, well, thank you. And I know we're going to pull up a slide of ways to continue to engage. Yeah. But this is, I think, it's always been important, but it's so important now, because I think what I've loved and respected about your work for so long, Barbara, and again, I've been with you in many, many different settings, it's not just about, bring women, and it's not ever about fixing women. It's about supporting, developing the skills, capacities we all need to thrive in the workplace. You do a lot of work with men. Some of the most powerful transformative experience for me has been in deep dives where I've talked to men and we're talking with each other about, like, what would you never say to that man you worked with, that you wish you could have said, and vice versa. And I remember being in one of these sessions, just really quickly, where this guy said to me, "It freaks me out when you cry. Like, I don't know what to do. I have like a trauma response to it. I don't know if I'm supposed to hug you, give you a Kleenex, walk out." And that was so transformative to me. I know it's trivial in some ways, but just this idea, if we can connect as human beings and see each other and value each other, and let's not put difference in this moment as bad and lead into a normative that really isn't working, for most people anyways. I mean, that's what anyway, I could go on and on. We're at the top of the hour. Ways to stay in touch with Barbara. Again, we might be doing something. I think we are doing something together. Yes. That's big and exciting and scalable. And you're going to be the first to hear. We are really in the process of launching the first ever female forward social platform. Think Twitter or Blue Sky, but really female forward, and leaning into creating community for women. Because just like I make this analogy, it's probably, now it's 12:01. I'm not going to say it. I was going to use an analogy about a tampon. Men don't use tampons. I mean, there's reasons for that. But I want to be like the social media tampon thing for women. Forget it. That really didn't work very well. But we are creating, we need places and spaces where we can be together and also honor and work together independently. And let's just say that. So just very excited to have you today, Barbara. I adore you. Everyone buy the book. If we can put the book up at the end, The Brilliance of the Female Mind, connect with Barbara. We thank you for your time today and joining us. And if you watch this on replay, always post your comments and we read them. So thanks again, Barbara. Have a great day.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.